Dear listeners, I ask you to listen to the story until the very end and be sure to write a review about what you liked and what needs to be changed to make it more interesting for you to listen to my stories. The neighbor behind the wall. I moved into the apartment on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky looks like it's been smeared with dirty dishwater. The place was small, cheap, and had that lingering scent of old carpet and cleaning chemicals, exactly what you'd expect from a unit that had been sitting empty for a while. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't need perfect. I just needed quiet. A place where I could be alone, get my life together, and finally shake off the exhaustion that had been weighing on me like a second skin. At first, everything seemed fine. The walls were thin, sure, but nothing unusual. I could hear muffled voices from the units next door, the occasional burst of laughter, even a dog barking somewhere in the building. Normal apartment noises. Nothing worth worrying about. But then, a few nights in, I heard something different. A knocking. Slow, deliberate, coming from the wall behind my bed. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Not the random thud of pipes, not the settling of old wood. Someone, or something, was knocking. I sat up, heart suddenly too big for my chest. My first thought was neighbors. Maybe some drunk idiot playing around, or someone trying to get my attention for some reason. I knocked back, 3 times, mimicking the pattern exactly. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, 3 more knocks, perfectly synchronized with mine. A chill crawled up my spine. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the wall. Silence. I told myself it was nothing. Someone being weird. Maybe a prank. Maybe an old tenant had trained their dog to scratch at the wall, and now it was just a stupid habit. I turned over, buried my face in the pillow, and forced myself to sleep. The next night, it happened again. Same slow, patient rhythm. 3 knocks. I ignored it. The night after that, it was louder. More insistent. This time, I didn't knock back. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, heart hammering. When the sound stopped, I told myself I was imagining things. That was easier. The mind plays tricks in the dark, right? Days passed. I started hearing the knocks at random times, not just at night. Sometimes in the morning when I was making coffee. Sometimes in the afternoon when I was watching TV. Always the same 3 knocks, always from the same spot on the wall. And then, the whispering started. It wasn't words. Not really. Just a low, breathy murmur, the kind of sound you might hear when someone is talking behind a closed door, just out of earshot. Except there was no door. Just the wall. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was the neighbors, the plumbing, my imagination. But it started getting to me. I was sleeping less, jumping at every little sound. I needed answers. So one evening, I did something I should have done from the start. I pulled out my lease agreement. I wanted to see if I could figure out what was on the other side of that wall. Maybe I had a neighbor I hadn't met yet. Maybe there was an empty unit, or a storage closet. Something that made sense. I spread the papers out on my tiny kitchen table, scanning through the floor plan. My apartment was on the corner of the building, which meant one of my walls was an exterior wall. The other side, the one with the knocking, should have led into the next unit. But it didn't. According to the plan, my bedroom wall backed up against nothing. Just an old structural divider, a thick brick wall that separated my unit from the building's original framework. There was no other apartment there. No closet, no hallway. Just solid, dead space. But the knocking hadn't stopped. I sat there, staring at the papers, my stomach twisting. My hands felt cold, my fingers numb. Something knocked on that wall, 3 times, slow and deliberate. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was the pipes. Old buildings like mine always had some kind of noise, creaking floors, hissing radiators, the occasional bang from the heating system adjusting to the night. But this was different. The sound came from the wall next to my bed, a slow, deliberate tapping, like knuckles against drywall. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. The first night, I ignored it. Just a neighbor, maybe adjusting a picture frame or knocking something over. The second night, it happened again. And the third. Always after midnight. Always the same rhythm. I considered knocking back, but something about it unsettled me. It wasn't random. It felt intentional. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a pre-war brick building in the city. The rent was cheap, and aside from the occasional noise from the street below, it was peaceful, at least until the knocking started. I didn't know much about my neighbors, and to be honest, I preferred it that way. People in this part of town kept to themselves. After a week of this, my curiosity got the better of me. I waited for the knocking and pressed my ear against the wall. The sound was faint, muffled by layers of paint and plaster, but it was definitely coming from the other side. I checked the time. 12:17 a.m. I held my breath, listening, expecting, what? A voice? Movement? Nothing. Just as I was about to pull away, the knocking started again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I stood back, heart hammering. I didn't like this. It felt wrong, like an invitation I wasn't supposed to answer. I told myself I was being ridiculous. There was a rational explanation. There had to be. The guy next door was probably just a night owl, tapping absent-mindedly while watching TV. Maybe he was a musician. Maybe he had a weird habit. I just needed proof. The next morning, I stopped by the landlord's office on my way out. His name was Jerry, a greasy-haired guy in his 50s who always smelled like cigarettes. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Who lives in 3B? Jerry frowned. "No one." I blinked. "What?" "No one's in 3B. That unit's been empty for years." The word settled in my stomach like a rock. "That's not possible," I said. "I hear noises. At night. Knocking." Jerry sighed, rubbing his face like he'd heard this before. "Look, kid, that apartment's been sealed off since before I took over. No one's lived there in at least 10 years. I didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. That night, I did something stupid. I knocked back. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. For a long time, nothing happened. I stood there, feeling like an idiot. And then, a knock. Not from the wall. From inside my closet. The sound echoed in the silence, a soft but unmistakable tap. I froze, the blood draining from my face, my pulse quickening. My heart thudded against my ribs, and for a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. I was tired, running on little sleep, maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, again, came the knock. Not from the wall. From inside my closet. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the closed door of the closet, my breath shallow, my hands trembling at my sides. It was too dark to see anything in there, the faint moonlight slipping through the blinds barely enough to cast a shadow across the floor. But I knew what I heard. It was real. It was hard to breathe, like the air had turned heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite place. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to look. But the knocking continued, slow and deliberate, tapping against the thin wood like a signal, an invitation, a warning. The clock on my nightstand blinked, 12:47 a.m. I hadn't been drinking. I wasn't imagining things. The knocking didn't stop. I took a step forward, my feet dragging as though they were weighed down by some unseen force. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, but somehow I found myself reaching for the handle. My hand hovered over it for a second, an eternity of hesitation. I could feel my body shaking, my skin clammy and cold, but something inside of me, the same irrational curiosity that had led me to knock on the wall, compelled me to open it. The door creaked as I turned the handle, and the sound sliced through the stillness, louder than it should have been. I wasn't ready for what I saw. There was nothing in the closet. Nothing except the usual: clothes, a couple of old boxes stacked in the corner, and the coat I hadn't worn in months. No one standing there, no hidden figure crouched in the darkness, waiting for me. But that wasn't what was wrong. It was the smell. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of damp earth, like soil that hadn't seen sunlight in years. It lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't place it, but it was wrong. Nothing about this made sense. Why would the knocking come from the closet? There was no way anyone could fit in there. And yet, the sound hadn't stopped. It still echoed in my ears. Even after I opened the door, the knocking continued. But this time, it came from deeper within the walls, further away, like something was trapped behind them, trying to get out. My skin crawled, a shiver running down my spine as I slowly closed the closet door and backed away, trying to shake the sensation of something unseen pressing in on me from all sides. My mind raced, but the answer was so simple I couldn't comprehend it. There was something in the wall. Not just any wall, but the wall that separated me from 3B, the vacant apartment that Jerry had mentioned. The apartment that, as far as anyone knew, had been empty for years. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of it all. My mind wanted to scream, wanted to tell me that I was being paranoid, that it was all just a coincidence, just a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't making this up. And then, it came again, the knocking. 3 slow taps. I stood up, feeling the weight of dread settle heavily in my chest, like a hand pressing down on my heart. The wall. The closet. The knocks. They were all connected. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what was on the other side of that wall. What was causing the knocking? But I couldn't just tear down the wall. There were rules, safety regulations, and what if I was wrong? What if there was nothing at all and I was just losing my mind? The rational part of me screamed for me to let it go, to stay in my apartment, to stay safe. But the other part, the part that had been slowly unraveling the longer I sat there in the dark, was desperate for answers. I had to see for myself. Without thinking, I grabbed a small hammer from my toolbox and set to work on the wall. The tapping sound, still faint, still distant, seemed to push me forward with every strike. The first few hits were easy, the plaster cracking and falling away in pieces. But as I dug deeper, the air grew colder. The knocks grew louder, sharper, like they were right behind me. I had to keep going. Finally, after what felt like hours of digging through the thick plaster and brick, I saw it, a small, narrow gap. I didn't stop. I pressed my hands into the hole, feeling the jagged edges scrape against my skin as I pried it open. What I found behind the wall wasn't a hidden room. It wasn't anything I expected. It was a tunnel. The walls were damp, the air stale and oppressive. The dark opening stretched far beyond what my flashlight could reach. And from deep inside, I heard the knocking again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the tunnel itself. I backed away, my pulse racing, the hammer slipping from my hand. I couldn't go down there. I couldn't. But then I heard something else, something worse. A whisper. It was so faint I almost missed it, but it was there. It sounded like a voice, like someone calling my name. The whisper grew louder, insistent, wrapping around my mind like a thick, suffocating fog. It wasn't my name, not the way anyone I knew would say it. It was softer, like a distant echo of something I couldn't quite remember. It wasn't just a voice. It was a feeling, a tugging sensation at the back of my mind, like something from the past trying to claw its way back into the present. I stood there frozen, my breath caught in my throat, my limbs rigid with terror. The tunnel was silent for a moment, but the whisper didn't stop. It lingered in the edges of my hearing, just beyond reach, pulling me closer to that dark opening in the wall. There was something in there, something that had been waiting. I wasn't sure what, but I felt it in my bones, a deep, gnawing certainty that whatever was in that tunnel had no intention of letting me go. I felt a sharp, biting chill in the air, as though the temperature in the room had dropped drastically. It wasn't just the tunnel that was cold, it was the whole apartment, like something had seeped into the very walls, like it was alive. I wasn't alone anymore. The space around me felt wrong, out of place, as if the reality I thought I knew had started to fray at the edges, unraveling slowly but deliberately. I knew I should leave. I knew that whatever was in that tunnel, whatever was whispering my name, was not something I could handle. But every fiber of my being screamed for me to move closer, to push past the terror and find out what lay hidden just out of sight. The knocking from the tunnel grew louder, more frantic, as though it, too, had been waiting for me. The sound echoed through my skull, vibrating against my teeth. I reached for the flashlight again, though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The beam flickered for a moment, casting long, shaky shadows across the room. I moved toward the opening, my feet moving of their own accord, like I was being dragged by some invisible force. The further I stepped, the more suffocating the silence became. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the feeling that something was watching me, listening, waiting for me to make the next move. When I was standing just a few feet from the hole, I felt a sharp pull in my chest, a tugging sensation like someone had a string tied to my heart and was slowly, relentlessly, yanking it. The walls of the tunnel seemed to pulse, drawing me in with an almost magnetic force, and I couldn't stop myself from taking one more step forward. I peered into the darkness, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the blackness, revealing the rough, damp walls of the tunnel. It was narrow, far narrower than I had anticipated, with jagged rocks and broken pieces of brick scattered across the floor. The air was thick with a musty scent, the kind of stale smell you find in places that have been untouched for decades. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw something else. Something that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. There, barely visible in the low light, were scratches. Deep gouges in the stone. The kind that couldn't have been made by human hands. They were too erratic, too frantic. They spiraled into the darkness, disappearing further into the tunnel, as if something, or someone, had been trying to claw its way out. Or in. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what I was looking at. Those scratches, they weren't recent. They had been there for years. Maybe decades. They were too deep, too permanent to be anything else. I stepped back, the fear suddenly flooding my chest like a cold wave. What had been trapped in there? What had made those marks? And why did I feel like I was about to find out, whether I wanted to or not? The whisper came again, louder this time, closer, almost right behind me. It wasn't a voice anymore. It was a presence. I could feel it, like a heavy breath against my neck, the sensation of something standing just out of sight, waiting to reach out and grab me. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. Only the knocking. Louder now. Unrelenting. It was coming from everywhere, from all directions, bouncing off the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was inside my head. The knocks weren't just noises, they were messages, signals, warnings from something ancient, something that had been buried in the dark for far too long. I turned back to the tunnel. It was as if the darkness had grown deeper, more impenetrable, the shadows reaching out, trying to swallow me whole. And then, I saw it. A shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some shadow playing tricks on me. But no. It was moving. Slowly, deliberately, sliding across the stone walls, an outline of something tall, something human-shaped. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its form shifting, indistinct, like it couldn't quite decide whether it was a man or something else. The only thing I could make out clearly was the face, or rather, what was left of it. A featureless, smooth surface where eyes should have been, where a mouth should have been. Just skin. Pale, sickly skin. And then, it reached out. I stumbled back, gasping, as the thing's hand, if you could call it that, extended from the darkness, long and twisted, reaching for me. It was faster than I expected, its fingers stretching impossibly far, the air around me suddenly heavy with the weight of its presence. I was already turning, running, the flashlight falling from my hand as I barreled toward the door, toward the only light that seemed like safety. My heart was pounding in my chest, my feet slipping on the floor as I tried to push open the door to my bedroom. But when I turned, I saw it. The door had vanished. There was no door. No hallway. No apartment. Just a wall. I backed away, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps, my eyes frantically searching for an escape, but there was no escape. Only the darkness, thick and suffocating, closing in around me. The whisper was louder now, the knocking deafening. And somewhere, far in the distance, something was watching me. The third episode begins as the noise, relentless and maddening, vibrates through the walls once more. I'm no longer sure what's real and what's imagined. The night feels endless, the air thick and suffocating as if the walls themselves are closing in on me. The apartment, once so familiar, now feels alien, hostile, as though it's been invaded by something beyond my understanding. I sit on the edge of my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, my body rigid with fear. The clock ticks loudly, an incessant reminder of time slipping away, but the staccato of that infernal knocking is louder. It's not coming from the neighbors anymore. It can't be. The walls don't connect to their apartment, there's nothing there but a brick wall, an old, cracked barrier. But still, the knocking persists, insistent, demanding attention. It's as if someone, or something, is trying to break through, trying to claw its way into my reality. I rise slowly, my legs shaking beneath me. The sound of the knocking pulses in my ears, like a heartbeat that's no longer my own. The floorboards creak under my feet as I move toward the wall. My mind races. I try to convince myself that I'm just imagining things, that it's some kind of mechanical noise or a strange echo from another apartment. But the truth gnaws at me, a dark truth I don't want to face. I'm not alone in this apartment. Not anymore. I press my ear to the wall, the cold surface sending a shiver through my body. The knocking stops. My breath catches in my throat. For a moment, all I can hear is the pounding of my own heart. And then, it begins again, louder, more frantic than before, as if whatever is on the other side knows that I'm listening now. The rhythm has changed, become more erratic, more desperate. I stumble backward, my mind spinning. I know what I have to do. I know what I've been avoiding for days, maybe weeks. I have to look. I have to know what's causing the noise, what's been hiding in the shadows of my apartment, lurking just out of sight. With trembling hands, I grab the flashlight I've kept by the bed, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. My pulse quickens as I move towards the wall. I've never looked closely at this part of the apartment before. It's always been just a wall, a boundary, something that didn't matter. But now, with each step, it feels like the very foundation of the apartment is shifting, like reality itself is starting to unravel. I reach the corner where the knocking comes from, the cold wall before me as solid as ever. My breath hitches as I shine the light across the surface. The wall is covered in cracks, old and deep, as if it's been there for centuries. I run my fingers over the surface, feeling the texture of the ancient bricks beneath my touch. My fingers tremble as I trace the outlines of the cracks, and that's when I feel it, the faintest vibration, a tremor beneath the surface of the wall. It's like something is moving, something is pushing from the other side. The flashlight slips from my hand, clattering to the floor, but I don't move. I can't. Something in me is telling me not to, that I shouldn't know what lies behind the wall. But it's too late. I've already crossed the point of no return. The knocking comes again, louder than ever, accompanied by a sound I can't place, a low, guttural rasping, like something trying to crawl through the bricks. And then, in that moment of pure terror, I realize what it is. The knocking isn't a sound at all. It's a warning. The wall begins to shift, slowly at first, like something stirring beneath the earth. The bricks groan, and the air grows thick, suffocating. I can't breathe. I try to step back, but my legs won't move. I'm frozen in place, unable to escape. The very air around me vibrates with an otherworldly force, a force I can't comprehend, can't control. The wall cracks open. Not in a neat, logical way, but in a jagged, uneven split that feels like it's tearing the fabric of reality itself. From within the dark hole that has opened in the wall, something emerges. Something I can't quite see, just a shadow, a shifting mass, like it's still forming, still coming into being. I can't look away. My mind is screaming at me to run, to leave, but my body refuses to move. The shadow grows, spreading like ink spilled in water, until it fills the space in front of me. It has no shape, no form I can comprehend, just an endless, swirling darkness that pulls me in. And then, as if in response to my terror, I hear a voice. Not a voice in the traditional sense, but a whisper, a hiss, one that feels like it's inside my head. You shouldn't have listened, it says, a low, raspy sound that sends a chill down my spine. The air grows heavier, and I feel something cold and wet brush against my skin, like fingers that aren't quite there, slipping through the edges of my reality. The whisper grows louder, more frantic, like a desperate plea. You shouldn't have found it. You shouldn't have listened. The darkness expands, swallowing the light from the flashlight, and I am consumed by it. And then, nothing. No sound. No movement. Just silence. The apartment feels different now. I don't know how much time has passed. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. But when I finally look around, the walls are intact. There's no crack, no opening. Just the same apartment, the same empty space. The knocking has stopped, and the air is still. But I know it's not over. It's never over. The wall is still there, and the darkness that lies beyond it is waiting. Always waiting. And maybe, just maybe, I'm not the only one listening anymore.